Um, Eric, let me know when you want to start. Okay, great. Wonderful. All right, everybody, we're going to get started here. Before we mute everybody, I'd like everybody to first say welcome and thank you to Murphy Quint, who generously provided these samples for us.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful. All right, so Eric, if you could please go ahead and mute everybody except for you, Murphy, and me, please. All right, we good? Wonderful. So, Murphy, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really, really enjoy these types of sessions. We're really glad that people like you are sharing with us both your time and your products. I got to tell you, I love that shelf behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about that shelf that you got going there? Because that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, thanks. It actually goes a little higher and a little bit lower. I put that up myself during the pandemic. You know, working in this industry for the last however many years, you have a tendency to acquire a lot of bottles, and instead of, you know, shoving them under my stairs and in closets, thought I'd put them up on some nice shelves and display them. So put that up, and yeah, it's been fun. It's a nice little background as well.
So tell us a little bit about Cedar Ridge. I mean, you guys started off with wine, right? Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's exactly right. So we started back in 2005. And at that point in time, it was my parents started the company. And at that point in time, what they were looking to do was something that they could kind of do as a passion project. And basically, you know, if they made wine the rest of their lives, they'd never work a day. And they didn't have to retire because they could do this winery. And that was the whole thing that they wanted to do. And it was a very beautiful concept. And at that point in time, there were already a number of Iowa wineries. So what they wanted to do was to differentiate our winery and kind of hook people in. You know, why would we go to Cedar Ridge? Well, they also have a distillery. And so that was like their hook. Their differentiator was, yeah, in addition to these Iowa wines, we'll make a little brandy, a little rum, a little vodka, a little gin. At that point in time, whiskey wasn't even really a part of the plan or on the radar. It was just kind of this niche idea to draw people into our winery. And it was a ton of fun. My cousin and I were working there on nights and weekends, just making some money after school and putting some gas in our cars and stuff like that. But as time went on, you know, we kind of evolved and we followed certain consumer trends. And at one point, my dad had the really genius thought that, hey, we're sitting here in the middle of Iowa, corn country. Why aren't we making any bourbon? You know, bourbon by law has to be made from at least 51% corn. We've got all the corn here. What are we doing? And so really from that moment on, I mean, we started putting a lot of bourbon away. And when we eventually released that, Iowans, because it was only released locally at that point in time, Iowans supported in a big way. I mean, they came out and they were really proud, and they rallied behind it. And we continued to put more and more away. And you kind of fast forward to today. Now we're 24 hours a day by 6 days a week whiskey production. So we're producing whiskey essentially around the clock. And I haven't told my team this yet, so keep it secret for now. But we're probably going to move to a 24/7 operation at some point next year.
I want to warn you. Remember, this is going on YouTube, and you know.
No, I'm just joking.
So were you making corn? Were you guys producing corn? While, you know, earlier on, like, was this a regular product for you, and then you decided then to use that corn for bourbon, or did you make a conscious decision to start growing corn in order to make bourbon?
That's a great question. And no, my family had our own corn farm. We've had it for generations. I mean, for many generations, it's been in our family, and you know, agriculture's been in our roots since the beginning of time, essentially. So that was something that we already had in place. Full transparency, though, I don't want to make it seem like we grow all of our own corn. We do use a lot of our own family corn, but we are dedicated to using only Iowa corn. So we bring it in from all over the state, most of which comes from our own family farm.
Okay, so this Iowa straight bourbon whiskey that we have right now, okay?
Yeah.
Tell us about the corn that is in here. How much comes from your farms? How much from other farms? The barrels, the process, stuff like that.
So
cheers, everybody. Cheers.
cheers. And here, let me grab a glass of that as well, and I'll sip along with you. But yeah, so this is our Iowa bourbon. It is our flagship product. It's by far the majority of what we sell, and it just last year actually became the #1 selling bourbon in Iowa. So we we surpassed Maker's Mark and Jim Beam and all those really, really great brands. So we do move a lot of this throughout the state as well as in the Midwest. We're trying to really push it hard in the Midwest where it's a relevant brand, and we're trying to gear it up for the Midwestern palate. But the mash bill on this is 74% corn, all from the state of Iowa, 14% rye, and 12% malted barley. So one thing that I always like to mention is that
let's slow down. I want to slow down for a second here because we got some real geeks on here who love hearing those percentages. Okay, so tell me again the percentage of corn, rye, malted barley.
74% corn, and that's yellow corn number 2, field corn. So 74%, a decent amount of corn in this mash bill because we're obviously the corn state, and we want to have plenty of that in there. And then you get to 14% rye and the 12% malted barley. And I think that that's a unique note, that malted barley, 12%, a pretty high amount to have in a mash bill. And I think that rounds it out nicely. What we're going for in this particular bourbon is something that is easy sipping, pretty approachable. It's only 86 proof, so it's not going to knock anyone's socks off. I've recently kind of started coining it similar to like a session beer. It's like a session bourbon. It's something that isn't overly powerful or overly full. It's a nice, enjoyable, easy sipping bourbon, and that's what we're going for with our Iowa bourbon whiskey.
Okay, so so a few questions here because some people here have really good memories, and it has to do with something you and I discussed before this session tonight. How different is this bourbon from the bourbon that you were producing, 10 years ago? And the reason I ask that question is because several of you might, do not know this. In our annual whiskey tasting that we do at my synagogue with Brett Pontani, about a decade ago, he introduced us to Cedar Ridge Iowa bourbon, and I ended up selecting that for the whiskey table at my daughter's bat mitzvah. So the bourbon I had at her bat mitzvah was Cedar Ridge. So yes, people here remember that we had that. How is this different from that bourbon back then, or is it the same stuff?
Yeah, and it will be a little bit different. Back then, I mean, we were definitely exploring different mash bills. To be honest, at that point in time, during those years, I took a teeny little break from Cedar Ridge, and I was out in Colorado working at Stranahan's Colorado Whiskey. So when they were kind of dialing that in, I can't say that I was exactly there to make those mash bills. It would be fairly similar. It's going to be the same corn source, but I'm sure we kind of bumped the rye and the barley content around a little bit.
Okay, got it. So
and I should mention age definitely has gone up since then. I mean, back then we were putting out a pretty young bourbon.
Got it. So when you say age has gone up? So I see here this bottle says aged a minimum of 3 years. So
yep. And so this particular bottle will vary anywhere from 3 to 4 years. But back then, I mean, back when Cedar Ridge was young and when many craft distillers were young, 2 years was very common to put out a 2-year bourbon. And now 3 years is more of the common benchmark that you want to hit. But so this is our minimum of 3 years, Iowa straight bourbon whiskey.
We're getting a lot of comments here that this drinks a little too easily. That's a little dangerous. I know that some people there's some snobs in the whiskey industry who don't like the word smooth. But I almost want to say it, but I have friends who'd be pissed at me for saying the word because they don't like the word. But this is delicious. It's drinkable. It's sweet. Yeah. You get a little, you definitely get the rye, get a little bit of the spice from the rye. Yep. And the malt so the malting, are you guys doing your own malting, or are you getting malted rye from somewhere else?
Great question. We don't do our own malting. I would really, really love to do that. I fantasize over starting Murphy's Malt House. One day we're going to get there. But for right now, we bring all of our malted grains in from Prairie Malt Facility, which is in Saskatchewan. And I've had the pleasure of going there, meeting with the team that does the malting. The guy, David Klinger, out there is the one who sources all of our malt for us. And he's one of my favorite people on the planet. A really good crew that works at the Prairie Malt Facility out in Saskatchewan.
Got it. I don't want to get distracted here, but when we talk about your single malt later, we're definitely going to be talking about Stranahan's too, because I'm sure that something you learned there went there. So just make sure that I ask about Stranahan's when I get to the single malt. Before we move on, tell us about the barrels.
Yes, barrels. Who doesn't love barrels? So we use all exclusively 53-gallon new American oak barrels for our bourbon. Obviously, by law, it has to be a new barrel every time. It has to be charred. We use char number 3. Although I will acknowledge that we have every now and then been exploring with some char number 4. I'm really optimistic about what that might do. Every batch of bourbon that we put out is a 10-barrel batch of bourbon, and I'm considering the idea of doing 9 barrels that are char number 3 and 1 barrel of char number 4, just to kind of wake it up and liven it up just a tad. So
then you blend them together.
Yes, correct. That's exactly right. So I am toying with that idea, but for right now, it's all char number 3, and we get all of our barrels from Independent Stave Company down in Missouri. So that's what we do for our barrels on this particular product.
And of course, since it's bourbon, these have to be virgin oak.
Yep, virgin oak every time. And we can use our barrels once again for our single malt, which we'll get into. So we don't have to unload them right after we empty the bourbon out of them. We can reuse them, but yes, virgin oak for our bourbon every single time.
And I'm sure that you also have the interesting option that others don't have of using your own wine barrels for aging whiskey.
You got it. That's one of the coolest things that we do. Obviously, that once again carries into the single malt, but from time to time, we can finish some bourbon in some unique wine casks, primarily American port. Our port cask finished bourbon is phenomenal. Most specifically, Batch 17, which was released earlier this year, has kind of a cult following to it. So if you get a chance, check out our Cedar Ridge port finished bourbon. It is a seasonal product for us. It's not always available. It might make an appearance at Binny's later next year.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna have to do that because I have a whole section of like port aged whiskeys that I like. So, goddamn, I got to put something else on the list. Okay, so I got to tell you, we're getting a lot of great comments. One comment here is that that this has really great legs for a lower proof whiskey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I do agree with you, and I don't have much content on that. Unfortunately, I don't want to speculate, but I do acknowledge that it does have great legs for an 86 proof bourbon. I can assure you that the proof is 86. We're very, very diligent about that. We pay very close attention to that as the law requires. But yes, I agree. It does have great legs.
Okay. Well, we already have a comment of Kenny saying this may be my new go-to bourbon. So we're already accomplishing one of the goals here. This is wonderful. So I want us to move along here because I know you have other great stuff and people are definitely going to want to ask you questions. You're one of the few distilleries, and there are more of them, but one of the few distilleries in the States, you're producing bourbons, you're producing rye, you're producing single malts, you're producing blends. You got it all going.
Yeah.
And this next one has won awards. Okay. And by the way, I love the name Quintessential. Okay. That's great. That's a genius name, Quintessential, given that your name is Murphy Quint. So tell us about the Quintessential single malt. And I'm going to ask you that other question soon about the blend and single malt thing, but tell us about this, please.
Yeah, and addressing the name really quick, it's a funny story. So obviously, my family's last name is Quint, and when the name Quintessential was brought up in one of our management meetings, our team of directors meets regularly to do some creative discussions and stuff. The name Quintessential was brought up, and my dad and I just immediately hated it. We're pretty modest people. We don't to have a product that had our last name on it. We were not super excited about that. But everyone else was really pumped about it and kind of pushed for it. And one thing led to another. And now I'm pretty much on board with it and enjoy it. Let me grab my Quintessential.
I think it's a great name. I personally think it's a great name. Quintessential is a great name.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it definitely fits. It fits that bill. That's for sure. So I am glad that we ultimately went with it. But all right, so let's dive into the Quintessential a little bit. So this is by leaps and bounds my favorite thing that we make. I am a single malt guy. It is in my background, obviously having worked at Stranahan's, but I'm just passionate about the American single malt whiskey category as a whole in general. And the reason being is from a producer, from a distiller, a blender's perspective, there's so much there's room for artistic freedom in the category of single malt. And to kind of elaborate on that, a difference is when it comes to bourbon and rye, really you put it in its new cask, and once it's in its new cask, you're kind of done with it until you blend your final batch. With single malt, that process is really just beginning. Obviously, you've got all sorts of different malts and things like that you can work with, but you can also utilize used casks and then unique finishing casks, and you can do like Solera methods. There's so many different things that you can do to manipulate and create the whiskey that you want to create in that category of American single malt whiskey. So I'm really, really glad to be a part of it. Now, this one in particular, This is our quintessential single malt. It is 92 proof. What we're going for here is an American single malt whiskey that drinks a lot like something that you'd have over in Scotland. And for those of you who haven't seen the label, I'll hold it up here. I'm not sure if my light's kind of weird, but it looks like that. We kind of dressed it up similar to a Scotch. And one of the reasons for that is that consumers are still pretty confused by what an American single malt whiskey is.
Yeah, we've talked about this.
So we know that.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah,
it's a mess. I mean, we've talked to Paul Hletko about it. We talked to Paul Hletko. We talked to Chris Riesbeck. It's the standards. There are no real standards. And so people don't know exactly what it is when you're talking about American single malt.
That's exactly correct. And I can promise you one thing: the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission. I actually just met with the group last week or earlier this week down in Kentucky for the American Craft Spirits Association annual conference, and they were working really, really hard to define that and make that a legal definition. I highly recommend looking up American Single Malt Whiskey Commission and seeing the legislation that they're pushing forward. It's fantastic. Okay. But
I have a few I have a few specific questions for you because we're getting a bunch of questions. So what and I have to ask you this question because of the bottle. The bottle says on it American Single Malt, but it also says the word blend on it. Yes. So I'd like you to expound upon that a little bit. Because those to me are contradictory in what we're used to in labeling.
Yes, and I completely agree with you on this. And this was something that I had concerns about when we designed this product and this label. So the term blend technically is not inaccurate. It's blended single malt, blended Scotch. It's a different category of whiskey than single malt. And so the word blend isn't necessarily wrong, but it is misleading and confusing because people read that and they associate it with the word blended, which might mean that there's different grains in it or that it's different distilleries and blended together. And that's wrong. This is a true American single malt. We distill it entirely at Cedar Ridge Distillery. It is 100% malted barley. So it is not a blended single malt. And I, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but I have asked repeatedly that we revise the label and get that word taken
good, because I got to tell you,
very confusing.
Yeah, I got to tell you, as a guy who knows whiskey, to me there was a contradiction. So I'm glad that you know about that. So tell us about the barley that goes into here. Where does it come from? By the way, some people are saying that they're getting some peat. Some people are saying that they're not. I'm not really getting much of any, peat smoke on there. So tell us about the barley. Tell us about whether or not there's any peat smoke going on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm going for. We'll get to that in a second. So this is 100% malted barley, and we get it all from our partner up at Prairie Malt in Saskatchewan. Like I mentioned earlier, all of our malted grains come from there, and they do a fantastic job. However, there is a little bit of peated malt in some of the barrels that we use for our quintessential, and I need to elaborate on that more. That is the only malted grain that we don't get from Prairie Malt Facility. We actually bring that in from Scotland, authentic peated malt from over there, and we will once a year. We'll spend a week to 2 weeks mashing peated malt on site. We actually did this in October this year. It's so fun because it stinks up the whole campus. It smells like a bonfire throughout all of Cedar Ridge, and it's fantastic. But I need to talk about how we make this quintessential because then the peat will make a little bit more sense.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to hop into that real quick. And this is my favorite thing that we do. So all of our single malt is made from 100% peated malt. We distill it twice, and then it all goes in used bourbon barrels, typically our own used bourbon barrels. It sits in those for about 2 to 3 years, and then from there is when the fun starts. From that point, we actually take the barrels out of our rick houses. We bring them into our production facility, and we transfer it all into a series of unique finishing casks. So, we'll use port, we'll use sherry casks, brandy casks, rum, you name it. We'll experiment with a bunch of different finishing casks. We'll let it sit in those barrels for another 2 to 3 years. And then we bring it into our production facility one last time, taste through everything, and determine which of those barrels should go into our Solera vat. So we've got this big tank at Cedar Ridge. It's called our Solera vat. It holds 1,000 gallons. And what we'll do is we'll fill it up with these barrels. We'll bottle it halfway down, and then we'll fill it up again. We'll bottle it halfway down and fill it up again. So we'll keep repeating this process. And the Solera vat is what we end up bottling out of. So the Solera vat is going to evolve over time in flavor profile. And the reason why some of you might be getting peat, some of you not so much, is because the batch that you have probably has a little residual peat from a previous batch in it. but then the next batch of barrels that I added in there didn't have any peated malt influence added into it. So the peat characteristics will change a little bit batch by batch, as will the rest of the flavor profile. For instance, the batch that I have here, I'm sipping on batch 1 right now. You guys probably have like batch 7. And so it has evolved over time as we've gone on. And I think batch 5 had a pretty significant amount of peat in it. So it's going to change, it's going to evolve, and it makes it fun for people to go back and try different batches to see how it's modified batch by batch. Now, I'm not looking to make a series of very different whiskeys. This should taste fairly similar every time, just minuscule differences, mainly in the amounts of smoke and fruit forwardness flavors.
Okay, so you said that there are wine casks used for aging some of this, correct?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Okay, tell us about those.
Yeah, so we have the benefit, as I mentioned earlier, of being a winery distillery combination, and we're one of very few of those in the entire nation. It's pretty uncommon. So when our winemaker, Kent Falker, who is a tremendous winemaker, by the way, when he empties a barrel of wine, I have the advantage of putting single malt whiskey in it later that day if I want to, when that barrel is still fresh, it's still moist on the interior of it, and it's going to impart more flavor into that whiskey because it hasn't dried out yet. So we can use our own fresh dumped wine barrels to finish our single malt in. And you should get plenty of notes of that in the single malt you're drinking today. Look for those port characteristics, look for red wine, even a little bit of white wine influence. We use white wine barrels as well from time to time. So yes, all of that will be in there. And that's what's so fun about this to me is that it's complex. There's a lot of depth to it. And it's because it is influenced by wine. It is influenced by brandy. It is influenced by rum. And if you think about those different things, those different spirits, when you nose it and when you taste it, you can actually pick those notes out.
Got it. So before we move on to the Slipknot, I have to ask you one more question about the quintessential here. So you worked at Stranahan's, okay?
Yeah.
Stranahan's is great. Stranahan's is another one that Pantani introduced us to several years ago. You know, that is, Stranahan's is great stuff. So can you tell us a little bit just about what you learned there and that you brought to Cedar Ridge?
Yeah, I mean, so Stranahan's still to this day. So I worked there from about 2011 to 2014 or somewhere in that range. And it is still to this day one of my favorite places on earth. It's kind of like a sports thing. It's like a team that I used to play for. And, when I get the opportunity to go back there, it brings back a ton of memories and I just love it. But I learned a ton there, and it was really, I'd say it was really eye-opening and changing, altering the direction of my career. When I went there, I had worked at Cedar Ridge, obviously, for a number of years. But at that point in time, I had mainly worked at Cedar Ridge because it was a family business and because I wanted to earn some extra money on nights and weekends after school and stuff like that. When I was at Stranahan's, that's when I really got my hands dirty with mashing and fermenting and geeking out about sanitation and things like that. I learned a ton there, especially from a man who I would consider my mentor, who is Rob Dietrich. And he is now no longer at Stranahan's, but he used to be the master distiller there and is now over at Blackened, working with the band Metallica. So, shout out to Rob. He's one of the greatest people I've ever met, and he taught me more than I learned in 4 years of college. But
got it. That's funny that sounds similar to the story a little bit of Bill Welter. Because Bill, he journeyman, and he worked for several years at Koval. It's like he learned a lot of his stuff at Koval, and then he went, but it's family farm. Now they're producing whiskey. It's a lot of similar stories there. And Bill's a great guy, of course. I'm sure you know him well.
Absolutely, and two great distillers there, Journeyman and Koval, awesome places. And one cool note on that, and I've been waiting for someone to write a really good story or a book on this. There's distilleries that have operated as like minor hubs and incubators for this entire distillery. And you kind of mentioned, he started at Koval and went to Journeyman. I started at Stranahan's and went to Cedar Ridge. You can map out these hubs that started around 2005, 2008, and you can watch where their distillers went all over the country and ended up creating new distilleries. And there will be more waves to come yet. So it is a really interesting concept.
Talk to Lou Bryson. Lou will write it.
There you go. He will.
All right. Yeah. So this next whiskey has won the Celebrity Whiskey of the Year award. And I have to admit, I did not know who Slipknot was beforehand. Eric, if you can just throw that picture up on the screen. I want everybody to see who Slipknot is. Slipknot is a band from Iowa. And again, I did not know them. that plays at Riot Fest, and they're the stuff of nightmares. Okay, when you look at their costumes, and they're from Iowa, so who the hell knew? I want you to tell us a little bit about what it is to produce a whiskey with a guy named Clown, who really is a nightmare clown. Because I read about this online in preparation for here, and from what I understand, Clown had a lot of input on what we are about to drink.
That's exactly right. Clown had a ton of input on this, and he still does to this day. So, yeah, it's bizarre, right? For those of you that haven't checked out Eric's picture yet, please check it out, because it's bizarre. And it's really interesting because Cedar Ridge, we're an Iowa distillery, and we're very reserved, modest folk, and we make these approachable whiskeys, easy sipping, as you guys have probably noticed from the last two that we just had here. And then one day, an opportunity for us to work with the band Slipknot came up. And bizarre story on that. Pretty much everyone at our distillery did know who Slipknot was. Most of us are huge fans. They actually reached out to my dad, the owner of the company, via email about maybe wanting to sit down and see if we could partner. And my dad did not know the band Slipknot. So he actually almost deleted that email before we even started working with them, which would have been absolutely devastating for our business. And,
that's hilarious, because I have a hunch. I have a hunch that I'm closer in age to your father than to you, so that doesn't surprise me that that he did not know who Slipknot was. Exactly. What amazes me here is that they actually reached out to you, because I know that there have been a lot of celebrities who have been producing whiskeys and gins and vodkas and stuff like that. So they contacted you, and what happened next?
Well, one thing led to another, and we really hit it off in our initial meeting, and we wanted to explore a little bit further. So Clown, the head of the band and the head of this project, he came out to Cedar Ridge, and I was pretty intimidated. I didn't know him well, and I was like, man, this guy wears a mask on stage. They kind of go bananas when they're performing, and I'm a pretty low key guy, and I don't know how this is gonna go. And he came out. We tasted through a bunch of barrels together. We did all these sample blends, tried different fruits, stuff like that. He ended up being the nicest guy I've ever met. He's super caring. He tells me all the time, like, hey, if you're ever in Des Moines, let me know. We'll grab a bite to eat with my wife and I. He's a very genuine guy who has almost an alter ego called Clown. And when they get on stage, man, they go insane. But and it's a fascinating show. You should definitely check them out. But anyway, yeah, so what we landed on here and what we have in front of us, I hope you're sipping on it, is a blend of Cedar Ridge bourbon and Cedar Ridge rye. We also produce some rye whiskey, and the reason that we landed on that is basically because of everything that I just said. We make a very approachable bourbon. Slipknot is a very bold and aggressive band. We couldn't release this quiet whiskey and have it represent this bold band. So what we did is we blended the bourbon and the rye together to liven it up and to make it a little bit more full, not necessarily more aggressive, but it represents the band a little bit better than what our normal product would do. So
what's the mash bill? What are the percentages and mash bills in here?
So it's a grain bill because it is mashed separately. So it's not like we're mashing this all at once. It is a blend of our bourbon, and I already went over that mash bill. That's 74% corn, 14 rye, and 12% malted barley. And then it's blended with our rye. And our rye is going to be almost an inverted mash bill of our bourbon, just about 75% rye. And then the remainder is corn and barley. So the blend itself is 60% Cedar Ridge bourbon, 40% rye. So it is going to be more bourbon heavy than it is rye. Okay. But you will get that nice spice to round it out.
And what's the rye? Product. Where's the rye come from? The actual the grain? Who's growing that rye grain?
Yeah. So back when these barrels were put away, and you got to keep in mind these barrels were in our Slipknot Reserve. They were put away about 5 years ago because our Slipknot Reserve is typically 5 years old. Back then, we were getting malted rye from Prairie Malt in Saskatchewan, like our other grain. So a lot of the rye in this is actually malted. We have since switched that, and we now use a cereal rye, an unmalted grain. So that's different now, but we won't see that come out in the bottle for a number of years yet because we have to wait for it to age. So.
Okay, so I need to stop you here because this is important. All right. So the Slipknot that we are drinking right now is Slipknot number 9 Reserve. Okay. And at Binny's right now, they have Slipknot number 9, but it's not Reserve. So you have done several versions of Slipknot, correct? So this has been this is tell us, it's a relationship that's going on for a while. You have different versions, and will there be more versions later?
Yes, great question, and that's exactly the case. We've only scratched the surface of what we're going to do together. These guys, they really want to create a legacy, and they want to expand away from just music and do some other cool art. You know, they're all about art. And so, yes, what we've done with them so far is the Slipknot Reserve that we're trying. I picked out the bottle for this because I prefer the Slipknot Reserve. It's one of my favorite things that we make, and I wanted to share that with you guys. But we also have our Slipknot number 9 small batch whiskey, which is very similar to this. It's the same blend of 60-40 bourbon to rye, but it's aged about a year less, and it is at 90 proof as opposed to 99 proof. So some small differences. The number 9 reserve, though, that we have right now has a lot more color, and I'm very, very diligent about the barrels that I pick, and I'm very strict on which barrels I'm going to put in those batches. I reject a lot of barrels and only put my favorites in the Slipknot Reserve batch.
Okay, I want to make sure that everybody here understands this. Okay, so right now on the shelves at Binny's, there's Slipknot number 9, but that is not the reserve. Okay, it's a different bottle from what we are drinking right now. And can you tell us when the reserve is going to? What are the plans for getting the reserves to Binny's? Like, when do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I almost brushed past that. So the Slipknot Reserve, the number 9 reserve, is actually a fairly rare item. It's not quite allocated, but we only do it a few times a year. And the supply chain issues have caught up with us. We've been struggling to get these bottles. We finally have them, and we are going to bottle it late next week, so you can expect it at Binny's later this year still. I mean, before Christmas, but about a week to 10 days from now, you can expect it at Binny's. So. And
the price will be,
we'll
how much will it be?
As possible, as soon as
what's the price?
$69.99.
Okay, yep. So you see the one that's on the shelves right now is like right. The one on the shelves right now, at least at my Binny's Lakeview, was $39.99. So
that's correct. That's... Yep. There's a mid price point between the two, and I hope you give them both a try. And then you mentioned us doing some other ones. We have done some seasonals around the area. You can find some Slipknot Iowa label anniversary special edition. It's a release that we did with them to represent their Iowa label, which was the first one they came out with. And it's just a one-time thing that we released about 20 barrels of earlier this year. And you can still find it online at some places. You might be able to find it at Binny's yet. So.
Got it. So I have one more question before we open it up to Eric and then everybody else. I'm just curious, when it comes to making whiskey, okay, what do you think is more important? The grain or the barrel?
Man, I mean, those are both very important. I don't know that I can pick one that would be more important than the other. I would say they're both important, but that's the cool thing about whiskey, right? Is that there are not just one or two things that make a whiskey important or unique. There are 10 to 15 to 20 different things that make a whiskey unique. I mean, still temperatures, the proof coming off the still, when you make your cuts, then obviously barrel, the char type, whether it's 3 or 4 or even more or less than that. There are so many different things that you can do to kind of make a whiskey your own and impart certain flavors and aromas into it that I don't know if I can pick a most or least important one. Okay. What I like most is that every distillery has their unique team with their unique skill sets putting out their unique whiskey. I think that's so cool. Like I said earlier, it's almost becoming a thing where it's like sports teams. Everyone has their own style. They put out their own whiskey, and you can support it or you can't support it, and that's kind of an exciting thing.
Okay, great. Eric, what questions do you have for Murphy?
Yeah, one question. Since you had brought up that since you are a winery as well, and you had mentioned that you're putting in both red wine barrels and white wine barrels into the single malt. How do the different types of wine barrels affect your bourbon, or your single malt?
Yeah, and a great question, and they do in a big way. And that's what's so fun. So one of the best days to come, like to Cedar Ridge for like a VIP experience, would be when we're filling the Solera, because what you can do is you can taste through all these individual barrels of single malt that we have on site, and you can actually learn for yourself. You can develop your own palate when you taste through them. It's so educational. But I mean, you get completely different notes from tasting. single malt that has been aged in an ex-Chardonnay cask versus something that's in a ruby port cask. I mean, you know, it's going to be night and day. And that's, once again, what I love so much about single malt is the variance. The variance is there. It's not just, you know, every barrel is this different. There's this different. I mean, there's a whole range, and that's what's so fun. So yeah, man, it'd be cool to get this group of people to come out and do kind of a unique VIP tour during a Solera Vat field day, so that you could actually experience it for yourself, because it's eye-opening.
Sounds like a road trip.
Sounds like a road trip, you know. Definitely sounds like a road trip.
The invitation's on the table. I can make that happen. Let's do it.
Okay. Yes, that will happen. But let's not lose focus on the business here right now. Eric, any other questions before we move on to the people who've raised their hands?
Not right now.
Okay, so looks like first is Paul, right? Yeah, looks like Paul's first. Paul, you want to unmute?
Sure. So I have two questions.
Okay.
I'm unmuted, right? Okay. There we go.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Number one, have you considered a Stone Sour Mash whiskey? And number two, thoughts on Machine Gun Kelly?
Sour mash whiskey, I have not. We have not experienced or experimented with any sour mash whiskey. It's something that I would honestly love to do. I would love to make all different types of whiskey. And as we expand, if we get to the point where we have a bigger facility, you will hopefully see one day that the Cedar Ridge production floor is not very big. We don't have much room for pilot systems and stuff like that. I hope as we expand, we can do that. We can incorporate a pilot mash tun and a pilot distillery, so that we can experiment with all sorts of things. Right now, in order to hit the production volumes that we need to hit right now, because the stuff that we're making right now is for 5-6 years down the road, and it's very important that we put a good quantity away. We really have to stay focused on the stuff that we're producing right now, and we don't have a lot of room to really get out there. As far as Machine Gun Kelly goes, I'll give you a thumbs up on that one. I'm a fan of everything. I love it all, and yeah, I'll give you a thumbs up.
Wonderful. All right, Ariel Tesher, unmute, please.
Hi there. Murphy, this has been awesome. Thank you very much. I have two questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have two questions for you. One, are you keeping this Slipknot below 100 proof for regulatory purposes? And then the other, just from what you mentioned earlier, you mentioned aging some of your single malt in ex-Chardonnay barrels. I've never really encountered anything like that before. I'm wondering how that turned out and if you have any products that you've released based on it.
Yeah, so as far as being under 100 proof, I will say that we have done the Iowa label version that we did, the limited edition. It was 103 proof, so we have gone above 100 with the band Slipknot. However, on the two core products, the number 9 and the number 9 Reserve, we have stayed below that number because it was entirely designed by Clown. Like I said, Clown was very involved, and he's all about the number 9. Okay, there are 8 band members in the band Slipknot, and then they always say that there is a 9th member, and that's the fans, that's the supporters. So they released this for the fans, and that's why they named it number 9. And so to kind of stick with that theme, they went with 90 proof for one of them and 99 for the other. But I promise you, Clown is the most creative and just energetic person on this planet. He wants to release all sorts of things. We're absolutely going to do some cask strength stuff. We're going to do some unique cask finish stuff later this year. I can't release too much about that yet, but we've only scratched the surface, and you'll see a lot more on that. As far as the Chardonnay cask single malt goes, I think we only had 2 barrels of that, and we also, a fun one, had an ex-white port, which is very uncommon, that we use to age single malt in, and they're very unique, very buttery, very light. It's the opposite of what we're used to. I'm a big sherry cask finish guy, port cask finish, and it's nothing like that. Very, very sweet, very light, and very, very buttery. It's fantastic. We need to do more of it. The hard part is you don't, like with the whiskey barrel, you empty it and a lot of times you're done. With a wine barrel, a lot of the times you can get more life out of them, and they're very expensive. So it's very uncommon that we'll actually retire one and send it to our whiskey operation. But I'll have to beg our guy Kent, our winemaker, to see if we can make that happen more often.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Michael Nolan's next. Unmute, please.
Thanks, because I was going to ask you if you meant me or Bloom, but anyway. Murphy, thank you very much for the samples and talking about your whiskey today. I really enjoyed your single malt. That leads me to ask, have you done anything with stores with barrel picks, either your bourbons or your single malt? I know that you've worked with Lost Lantern, an independent bottler, doing 2 separate releases. Are you going to plan to do more in the future with them or other independent bottlers?
Yes, thanks for asking, and thanks for mentioning our partnership with Lost Lantern. They came out and they have selected some of the best barrels that we have. As a matter of fact, funny story on that. I'll be quick. If you like sherry cask finished single malt, you have to get the Lost Lantern pick of our single malt that they just came out with recently. And you can see a video of this on their website, and I'll be quick. When they came out and they tasted through a bunch of our barrels, I had this barrel off in the corner that was one of my favorites. I had been working on it for a long time, and I wanted to release it as like a distiller's edition or something like that. And after we went through a few barrels, as we all have a tendency to do, I had some good ideas, and I decided that we should tap into this fun barrel of single malt that I've been sitting on. And they tasted it and immediately said they wanted to buy it. And well, my dad was right there, who was a businessman, and if someone wants to buy something, he's going to sell it. So that's how I lost my favorite barrel of all time to Lost Lantern. And at this point, I'm very glad they did it though, because it's phenomenal. It's right here. Looks like this, and it's just stellar.
Hopefully they gave you a case or two.
They were kind enough, because they knew how painful it was for me. They were kind enough to send me a bottle, and I really appreciate that. Adam and Nora, the heads of Lost Lantern, some of the best people in the world. On the subject of barrel picks, we do barrel picks all the time. It's been a while since we've done one with Binny's. However, I swear to you, I am not making this up. We are actually bottling a Binny's store pick tomorrow. They had settled on one a few weeks back, and it's pretty rare that we do a single barrel bottling day, because we try to save like 5 or 6 of them up to bottle all in one day. So they are one of them that we'll do tomorrow, and I guarantee you later next week you can find a Binny's store pick from Cedar Ridge on the shelf.
Wow, is that a bourbon or a single malt?
I should have specified that. It is a bourbon, and it's a fantastic pick. They nailed it. Yeah.
I was going to ask that too, Michael.
One last thing, Gil, you're wrong. You can get the reserve all over the place at Binny's. You just have to get outside your neighborhood.
Oh yeah, man, I got to leave 606, 57, and 14 and 13. Got it. All right, so that's good to know. All right, so that's important for people to know, so that the Slipknot number 9 reserve is available in some of the Binny's. Okay, great, wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, Josh Eisenberg's next. Please unmute.
All right, thanks so much, Murphy. This has been awesome. I love it. I have just a question to clarify, and then another question, both about the Slipknot number 9 reserve. So I was just curious, because you mentioned that I just want to confirm that the Slipknot number 9 reserve, you said was 40% rye, or is it 35? Because I saw a 35 somewhere, and then I was like not sure if it had changed or just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to clear that up. So the recipe that Clown decided on was a blend that is 60% bourbon, 40% rye. With that being said, I always kind of phrase it as that is the recipe that Clown wrote, but I kind of cooked to taste. So it is generally 60-40, but if it's tasting off, I might throw a little bit more bourbon there, or a little bit more rye to balance it out. I want it to be a well-balanced product, because as you guys probably know, it's one of the reasons why we're talking about it today. We're not marketing this to just Slipknot fans. It's very important that it's appreciated by whiskey connoisseurs, whiskey geeks like myself. And so that's why I'm always looking for a quality balanced product. So it's 60-40, but I cook to taste.
I guarantee you I appreciate the quality.
Hey,
as a rye drinker. So then the second part of the question was just around if there's anything special going on with the barrel that you use, since you have a little bit more permission. It's a blend, corn and rye and malted barley.
Sorry, I cut out there. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, if there was anything special or different going on with the barrel that you used for this.
Yeah, not yet. So it is all new American oak, all char number 3, both the bourbon and the rye, and we blend them together into one finishing vat before we bottle it. So the barrels are pretty normal. However, I will say that next year we're going to release a one-off that is a specific cask finish. Clown will kill me if I start to release too much information on that right now, but we are doing some unique cask finish stuff later next year. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Okay. So this was a char number 3. And did you say that the quintessential was that a char 2?
So once again, that is char number 3, but it's a used cask. So it's going to impart much less flavor. So we use that New American, the Virgin Oak char number 3 on our bourbon. And then once the bourbon's out of that barrel, we'll reuse it for single malt. So it's still char number 3, but it's a used up barrel that's not going to have much char influence.
Got it. Cool. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Great.
Thank you.
Next, Michael Bloom, please unmute. And then after Michael, we're going to William Myers.
Sure. Murphy, thank you so much. I've been a huge fan of your single malts since I grabbed the number 2 version of Quintessential a while back.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
A couple clarifying questions that are quick answers, and then just a question about collaborations, because I know you guys do that too. So the first question was, you mentioned that you do 10 barrel batches of bourbon. How often do you do a batch?
It depends on the season. We'll definitely do it to demand. I mean, right now, I mean, we are doing about 1 batch a week. We sell a lot of this, primarily in the state of Iowa and the Midwest, but, we sell about 1,200 cases of it a month. And when you get to months like September, October, November, which are the biggest seasons for bottling, because you have to prep for the holidays, it has to be on the shelf by December. We'll be doing like 1.5 bottlings of it a week. So yeah, we'll empty anywhere from 10 to 20 barrels a week of it during the busiest months of the year.
Cool. Thank you for that. The next question was about cask strength. You mentioned that you might be doing some cask strength releases, but in Iowa, what is cask strength? What is the range of the stuff that you'd see when you bottle cask strength from your distillery?
That's a fun question. Not many people ask me that. So going into the cask, we always put it in the cask entry proof at 120. That's our standard policy. That's what we put it in at. And then I've seen a range of anywhere from about 119 to 121. So we stay fairly consistent. We bottled a 6.5 year barrel. Let me see right here. So we have what we call our SBC, our single barrel collection. It's a highly allocated product that we do, and we only do it a couple times a year. But we bottled that at 121.6 proof. And that was 6.5 years old. So I like to think that they start to go up a little bit the older they get. However, I have seen some that have dropped a little, and it's just kind of you have to keep in mind that we age everything in a non-climate controlled environment. So it's going from hot to cold all the time. And I think that can create some inconsistencies in that proof, because, for instance, some barrels might see 5 winters and 4 summers. Some might see 5 summers and 4 winters, and that's going to create a variance.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And my final question, and I'm sorry for the 3-part question, was sorry, Paul, is that I was just curious about where you are in collaborations with other distilleries, because I believe that your distillery has been part of collaborations with blending whiskeys across distilleries in the past.
So we've done some small stuff there, and it's something that I'd like to do a little bit more of. I think that, and this is just kind of a gut instinct prediction, I think that's going to be more and more common. So I was just down in Kentucky for a craft distillers conference, and now there is, I want to say it's 2,390 or something like that craft distilleries in the United States. And as more and more of them grow and come of age and start putting out some really, really good stuff, like many of them already are, I think we're going to see more distilleries working hand in hand. It's something that we've already seen in the world of beer, and I think that distilleries will follow suit. So it is something that, I love craft distilleries. I have a lot of friends, obviously, that maybe I met at Stranahan's or wherever, that work at different distilleries, and I'd love to partner up with them and do some unique stuff. That'd be a dream for me.
Great. Wonderful. William Myers, please unmute.
Sure. So, Murphy, you said you like single malt. I was curious, what are your favorite distilleries?
Favorite distilleries outside of Cedar Ridge. I mean, this is always tough because I'll leave a bunch out. I mean, I'm an American single malt. Obviously, there's Stranahan's, which I have a close spot in my heart for. One that I really appreciate that does some cool stuff is Santa Fe Spirits. They have a really, really unique mesquited malt. I believe it's called Colkegan. The owner there is Colin Keegan. He's an incredible guy.
Yeah, we're familiar. We're actually familiar with Cole Keegan. In fact, Greg Pontani, at last, we were very lucky to get a fundraiser in right before COVID hit, and at that event, he introduced us to Cole Keegan, and several of us on here actually compete in kosher barbecue competitions, and it reminded us of brisket. Because he's smoking it with mesquite. So yeah, Cole Keegan is amazing stuff.
Yeah, they do incredible stuff. So there's them who I'm always a fan of. Virginia Distillery Company does some really good stuff. Obviously you've got Westland and Westward. You've got Balcones. I mean, there's so many of them.
What about Scottish single malt? Do you like any Scottish single malt? Or?
Oh man, do I love it. I've been on a Bunnahabhain kick lately. And I know that, I guess I don't know where everyone else stands on Balvenie, but I'm passionate about them because they were my intro into the world of single malt in general. I had never had one, and then my buddy bought me a Balvenie Caribbean cask, and that was my first single malt ever. And now it's like what I exclusively do. So I have a spot in my heart for them. Yeah, I mean, you name it. I've probably got a bottle of it back here somewhere. I love anything from Scotch that's uncommon. I mean, the distillers editions that are kind of, I guess you guys don't realize how lucky you have it being in Chicago, where you've got such an awesome selection. Here in Iowa, we're a controlled state, so I don't have a selection here. But anytime I go to Binny's, I buy up all their cool scotches and have a heyday with it for the rest of the year.
And then you guys make a rye, correct?
Yes, we do. Let's see.
So I have a suggestion, just because it's I'm more of a Scotch guy than a bourbon guy, but I did try something I thought was cool, so I'm trying to get more people to do it. I was on a Zoom, and the folks at Peerless did a rye that was finished in an absinthe barrel from their friends down the street at I just drew a total blank.
Okay.
I meant like Apple Brandy. They're in Louisville. Just totally blanked on it.
Oh,
it's okay.
But still, like trying.
Don't worry about it.
Suggest doing a rye, finishing a rye in an absinthe barrel. I think it was awesome. So
I'll have to give that a go. And
Copper and Kings.
Oh, Copper Kings is awesome. And we might have to give that a go. Especially with rye, we've my coworkers and we've been on kind of a kick of experimenting with some fun cask finishes just to like spice things up. And like I said, we can't really get too experimental on the mashing and distilling side because we have production volumes to hit. But when it comes to cask finishing, every now and then we'll try something fun, and I'll have to give that a go. That's a good idea.
Got it. Wonderful. So I got to tell you, these samples are amazing. Okay, I love what you gave to me, and I want to make sure people realize how we get to this point. Okay, so when Eric and I contact the distillers, okay, a lot of times they ask us, what should we send you? Okay, and I throw the question back to them. Okay, how do you want to showcase your distillery and your products, and your artistry to us? And these three are amazing because, you have your straight bourbon, which is just, it's a deliciously drinkable. The Slipknot number 9, which is technically Slipknot number 9. Would you consider that to be a bourbon? Because it is 51% corn, right? But it is a blend.
Technically, it's a blend of straight because a straight bourbon would technically all have to be mashed and distilled together, whereas these are blended post-production.
Okay.
Two different whiskeys. So it's a blend of straight. Yep.
So technically it's a blend. And then you have this single malt. And, we talked about this American single malt stuff. What are the standards? I keep going back to it. Okay. This is damn good. And there are a few people on here. I think I might have told you this, that I also, every year, I'm involved in a fundraiser for a homeless shelter, and Pontani and I, we curate the collection of what, we're going to be showcasing at that fundraiser every year. And, we have a whiskey table, and we also had Cedar Ridge single malt this year added, and it was a huge hit. Yeah. People love this stuff. And although you're trying to be humble with the name, I think the name Quint Essential is just genius, if you ask me. Really. So no, my pleasure. So we're almost done with our time here. I do have a question for you before we wrap it up. And it has to do with just, the time of COVID. Okay. Right now, okay, is your distillery open? Are you doing tours? You know, how are you interacting with the public other than as we are doing right now?
Yeah, and we were closed for a long time. We have since opened back up, and our tasting room is back open and up for business. We are doing tours, not as often as we were doing them pre-pandemic, but we're doing them on the weekend at least. And so, yeah, you definitely can come out and you can check things out. However, you asked like how we've altered things. I've been doing a ton of these. I mean, we, you know, and I really, really enjoy them. Like all of you, I suppose, I wish that we could be together in person, clinking our glasses together and you know, rubbing shoulders and doing that thing. Cause that's what whiskey, in my opinion, is all about, is trying new things and interacting with friends. So I really wish that we could be doing it that way, but I'm always very happy and honored to be doing stuff like this, because that's what we can do. So yeah, that's what we have been doing. I will say that, like many other distilleries, we took a very quick and hard pivot into the world of hand sanitizer, and that we didn't just do a little hand sanitizer. I mean, we did about 7 truckloads of hand sanitizer, and that's what allowed us to actually not lay anyone off, but we actually added jobs during the pandemic, because we were manufacturing hand sanitizer for postal services and hospitals and just, I mean, all over the country. We were fielding POs, and that kept the wheels turning. It allowed us to keep producing our whiskey, so we're not going to have a big gap in our inventory later on. And most importantly, we kept everyone employed.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm glad you were able to do that.
Yeah.
Just before we wrap up here, I got to tell you that 2 weeks ago I was in Israel, and it's funny how you mentioned, you know, how much we all miss clinking the glasses together.
Yes.
And I happen to, pure dumb luck, and some people say it's because God works in mysterious ways. I happened to be in Israel during Whiskey Live Tel Aviv. And, you know, the event went on. It was freaking amazing. I was almost in tears at like just being at a live whiskey tasting again with hundreds of people and many tables. And Eric and I formed this group because COVID hit right before Whiskey Week here in Chicago. Okay. Yeah. And we have all these friends with whom we've been drinking, you know, together in person at these whiskey tastings for so many years. I got to tell you, we are really looking forward to getting back to that. But at the same time, people like you who have been generous with your time and, you know, your products have helped us build a community and really look forward to things during, you know, the nightmare that is COVID, the shared misery that is COVID. So we thank you for this. And what I'd like everybody to do right now is I'd like everybody, if you are so inclined, to pour yourself another dram. I'm going back to the single malt. I'd like everybody to unmute. If everybody can please unmute and join me in saying thank you very much and cheers to our special guest, Murphy Quint.
Cheers. Cheers. Wait to get home and try it.
Cheers. Murphy, this was amazing. Do you have any final words? Do you have any final words for us before we turn off the recording?
No, I don't. I mean,
let it all rinse out.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. Like I said, you know, I really miss,
and don't.
I really miss doing this in person. And you know, like you were saying, there's kind of a bright light in all this, and that's that. Without the pandemic, there's a good chance that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet any of you or get to interact with you. And so that is a bright light. And I really appreciate the opportunity to sit here and have a couple of drams with you. I enjoy it as much as you do. I promise you that.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much.
Thank
Again,
you.
Cheers.